Mara had never expected a quiet Thursday afternoon to change the way she saw her stepson, Ethan, and yet there he was, standing in the living room with a nervous energy she couldn't quite place, holding a sketchpad like it contained the weight of the world, and for a moment she hesitated, unsure whether to ask him what he wanted or wait for him to speak, and then he did in a voice barely above a whisper. "Mom, would you sit for me? I want to paint you." And Mara blinked, startled, because she had never posed for anyone before, had never thought of herself as the kind of person one might immortalize in art, and yet something in Ethan's earnest, anxious gaze made her heart tighten in a way that was unfamiliar, almost thrilling, and before she could think too deeply, she found herself nodding, agreeing to something she didn't fully understand but which already made the air in the room feel charged, electric, like the calm before a storm, and she watched him carefully lay out his pencils, brushes, and paints on the old wooden table in the corner, arranging them with a meticulousness that spoke to a seriousness she had never seen in him before. And as he asked her to sit on a chair near the large window where the soft afternoon light poured in, she noticed the subtle tremble in his hands and the careful way he avoided looking at her directly, as if trying not to betray the intensity of his feelings, and Mara felt a flutter in her chest that was completely new, a mixture of curiosity, pride, and something tender that she didn't have words for, and she settled into the chair, smoothing her hands on her lap, trying to appear casual even though her pulse was racing, and Ethan took a few steps back, turning his body slightly to study her posture, the tilt of her head, the way her hair fell around her shoulders, and Mara, trying to make conversation, asked him why he wanted to paint her now, and he hesitated, frowning slightly as if the answer was difficult to say, and then finally murmured that he had been struggling with a blank canvas for days, searching for inspiration, and seeing her, the woman who had welcomed him into her home, who had supported him quietly through the ups and downs of life, had suddenly become the only spark he could hold on to, and Mara felt a lump form in her throat, realizing that this was not just a casual request but a moment of vulnerability from someone she cared about deeply, someone whose artistic spirit she had always admired from afar. And as he picked up a pencil and started sketching the outline of her face, she noticed the intensity in his eyes, how he observed every detail, every line, every expression, as if he were trying to capture not just her appearance but her essence, and Mara, who had always been cautious about being seen, felt strangely exposed, but in a comforting way, like being truly known without judgment. And they talked quietly as he worked, exchanging small stories about their days, laughing softly at little memories, and Mara found herself relaxing into the presence of her stepson, noticing the gentleness in his gestures, the care in the way he approached his art, the thoughtfulness in every line he drew, and she began to see him not just as a young man she lived with, but as a complex, sensitive soul with dreams, fears, and a need to be understood. And the more she watched him focus, the more she felt a connection that went beyond words, a silent conversation flowing between them in glances, gestures, and pauses, and Mara felt a warmth spread through her chest, a quiet recognition that this afternoon, this act of sitting still while he painted, would become a memory she carried with her, because something unspoken was stirring, a bond forming in the shared space of the studio, in the soft light, in the small, careful movements of pencils across paper. And she realized that this was a rare gift, this trust, this openness, this willingness to show vulnerability, and she found herself watching him almost obsessively, noticing the way his eyebrows knitted in concentration, the slight tilt of his head, the way his lips pressed together when he tried to perfect a line, and Mara's own emotions were tangled, confusing, tender, a mixture of maternal pride, admiration for his talent, and an inexplicable fluttering that left her heart racing. And the afternoon stretched on, the light shifting gently as the sun moved across the sky, and Ethan worked silently, occasionally glancing at her with a question in his eyes, and Mara responded with nods, smiles, soft words of encouragement, feeling more alive, more seen than she had in years. And when he finally put down his pencil and looked at her, she caught the flicker of hesitation, of hope in his gaze, and Mara, curious and slightly breathless, asked, "Do you like what you see?" And he smiled faintly, not entirely confident in his answer, and she realized that this small moment, this simple request to pose for a painting, had created a space for emotions neither of them fully understood. Space that was tender, intense, and quietly transformative. And Mara, feeling the weight of the afternoon, the intimacy of the shared silence, and the subtle electricity of connection, knew that this was only the beginning, that the painting was more than lines on paper, that it was a doorway into understanding, trust, and feelings they had yet to name. And as she stood to stretch, looking down at the sketch he had begun, Mara felt a shiver of anticipation, a quiet awareness that something profound was unfolding between them, that their relationship was shifting in ways she couldn't predict, and she wondered how the next painting session would feel, what emotions it would reveal, what truths would surface. And as Ethan cleaned his brushes and glanced up at her with a tentative smile, she realized she was already looking forward to it, already carrying a new awareness in her heart, a mixture of wonder, admiration, and the gentle stirrings of something deeply human, something that made the ordinary afternoon feel extraordinary. And she left the studio with a lingering sense of possibility, a quiet heartbeat of connection, knowing that their story had quietly begun, one sketch at a time, one glance, one unspoken word, and the memory of that first moment, that first brushstroke of emotion, would stay with her, coloring her thoughts, her dreams, her afternoons. And Mara, smiling softly to herself as she moved through the house, felt a warmth she hadn't felt in years, sensed that life, art, and human connection could surprise her in the most unexpected ways, and she couldn't wait to return to that quiet room, to sit again, to be observed, to be known, and to see where this fragile, beautiful connection might lead. Days passed after Mara's first sitting for Ethan, yet the memory of that quiet afternoon lingered in her mind like a gentle echo she couldn't shake. She found herself thinking about him in moments she hadn't expected, the way his eyes studied her with a mix of concentration and something tender that made her pulse quicken. And when Ethan called her again, asking if she could sit for another session, she felt a strange mixture of excitement and nervousness, as if the universe had opened a door to a room she hadn't known existed inside her heart. She agreed without hesitation, even though a small voice inside whispered caution, reminding her that he was her stepson and that boundaries were important. But that voice was drowned out by curiosity, by the warmth she felt when she was near him, by the way her afternoons seemed brighter when she imagined sitting quietly in his studio while he worked. That first morning, she arrived to find the studio rearranged, sunlight streaming in through the high windows, casting gentle shadows across the floor, and Ethan already standing with his easel ready, brushes lined neatly, pencils sharpened, and a small sketch of her from their last session pinned to the board. And she noticed the intensity in his eyes as he looked at her, a mixture of admiration and hesitation, and she felt herself soften in response, allowing herself to be seen in a way that felt unfamiliar yet comforting. As she settled into the chair near the window again, Ethan began working silently, his hands moving deftly over the canvas, capturing lines and curves with precision, and Mara watched him, fascinated, not just by his talent but by the way he seemed to pour his emotions into every stroke, the way he paused occasionally, glancing at her as if seeking permission, seeking understanding. And she smiled softly, offering small reassurances, feeling her heart expand with quiet pride. They spoke in low tones, sharing stories of their days, anecdotes that were funny or poignant, memories of moments they had both cherished separately but were now sharing. And in those conversations, Mara began to see a depth in Ethan she hadn't noticed before, a sensitivity that was rare, a longing for connection that mirrored her own. And sometimes their hands brushed, accidental yet electric, leaving Mara momentarily breathless, a shiver of unexpected emotion passing through her as she looked at him, noting the focus and care in his expression. And Ethan, in turn, seemed aware of the tiny sparks that lingered in the room, yet neither of them spoke aloud, the questions forming silently between them. Over the course of several sessions, the sketches evolved into a nearly finished painting, and Mara marveled at how he captured not just her appearance but the subtle nuances of her expressions, the fleeting emotions that crossed her face, the quiet dignity in her posture. And she realized that this was more than art. It was a mirror reflecting a side of herself she rarely saw, a side that was confident, alive, and tender all at once. One evening, the light fading into soft amber, Ethan set down his brush and hesitated, looking at her with a softness that made her stomach flutter, and said, "Do you see yourself the way I see you?" Mara's breath caught, and she realized the question was not about vanity or ego but about the connection forming between them, about the recognition of something beautiful, vulnerable, and real. And she found herself nodding, though words failed her, because the intensity of that moment didn't need explanation, it simply existed between them, quiet and profound. As the weeks went on, Mara noticed subtle changes in her feelings, an awareness of Ethan's presence that lingered even when she was alone, a warmth that bloomed in her chest at his laughter, at the gentle attentiveness in his gaze, and the afternoons in the studio became something she anticipated. A time to step outside the routines of life, to be seen, to share, to feel, to connect in ways that words alone could not convey. They discovered shared passions beyond painting, discussions of books, music, dreams of places they wished to visit, philosophies about life and love, and Mara realized that the bond forming between them was layered, built not just on the intimacy of sitting together but on mutual respect, admiration, and a deep, emotional understanding. Yet alongside the warmth, there were moments of tension, moments when Mara felt the fluttering of emotions that conflicted with the societal boundaries she had always respected, and moments when Ethan's eyes lingered just a second too long, revealing a yearning that made her pulse accelerate, a mixture of pride and confusion, attraction and concern, and she recognized in herself a fascination with him that went beyond familial affection, a curiosity and tenderness that made her heart ache in ways she hadn't anticipated. One afternoon, as Ethan worked on shading a delicate part of the painting, he paused, looking up at her with a faint, nervous smile and said softly, "I hope this isn't strange. I just want to capture you honestly." Mara smiled back, her voice catching slightly as she replied, "It's not strange. I trust you." And the words felt heavier than they should have, carrying with them unspoken emotions, acknowledgement, and a sense of intimacy that neither of them could name yet both felt keenly. The hours slipped by unnoticed, punctuated by soft conversation, shared laughter, moments of quiet reflection, and the subtle tension of feelings neither dared to voice aloud, and Mara began to notice how the air in the studio seemed to hum around them, charged with the beauty of creation, admiration, and a connection that felt inevitable, fragile, and profound all at once. One day, Ethan accidentally knocked over a cup of water while mixing paints, and as they both leaned down to clean it, their hands met, and Mara felt a jolt, a surge of emotion that left her breathless, a mixture of shock, awareness, and the realization that their bond was becoming something more complicated, more emotionally stirring than simple family love, yet safe, tender, and full of human warmth. And in that moment, a shared glance passed between them, unspoken but loaded with recognition of feelings, a silent acknowledgement that neither wanted to cross lines yet both were profoundly moved. The painting neared completion and Mara could see herself emerging from the canvas through Ethan's eyes. A version of herself she hadn't fully appreciated before. Strong, delicate, expressive, beautiful in ways that weren't just skin deep, and she realized that the act of being his model had transformed her self-perception, opened her heart to emotions she had long suppressed, and deepened her empathy for someone she loved and cared about so deeply. By the time the final strokes were added, the studio was quiet, the soft light fading into dusk, and Mara stood to admire the work, her eyes meeting Ethan's, and in that gaze was the acknowledgement of everything unspoken. Admiration, care, a tender longing, and a connection that neither could fully define yet both understood. And as they stood together in the gentle shadows, Mara felt a warmth in her chest, a fluttering of the heart, a realization that this artistic journey had become a journey of the soul, of emotions, and of bonds that transcended ordinary relationships. And as she left the studio that evening, the image of herself on the canvas lingered in her mind, and the memory of Ethan's careful, earnest eyes, the brush poised in his hand, and the quiet intimacy of their shared afternoons stayed with her like a soft, persistent heartbeat, leaving her anticipating the next session, the next conversation, the next quiet, emotional exchange, knowing that each moment spent together was shaping both of them in subtle, profound ways, and that the path of their connection was winding, emotional, and beautiful, full of questions, longing, admiration, and the promise of something quietly transformative, a bond that was growing stronger with every shared glance, every conversation, every brushstroke, and every heartbeat in the room filled with sunlight, silence, and art. And Mara, walking through the quiet house that evening, felt a tender excitement she hadn't felt in years, mixture of hope, curiosity, and an emotional awareness that this connection with Ethan was changing her, enriching her, and opening her heart to feelings both thrilling and mysterious. And she knew, without fully understanding how or why, that these afternoons in the studio would remain in her heart forever, shaping not just her perception of herself, but of love, trust, and the profound power of being truly seen. The day of the final painting session arrived with a quiet anticipation that seemed to hang in the air around Mara and Ethan, and from the moment she entered the studio she felt it, the soft hum of expectation, the warmth of sunlight spilling through the tall windows, the faint smell of paint and pencils, and the subtle electricity of a bond that had been growing stronger with each passing session, and Ethan greeted her with a tentative smile, brushing a stray lock of hair behind his ear, and Mara noticed how he seemed smaller yet more focused than ever, as though the culmination of weeks of work had pressed a weight on his shoulders, a delicate mix of pride and vulnerability, and she felt a stirring in her chest, a flutter of emotion that made her pause for a heartbeat, realizing that what they had built together over these afternoons was more than sketches and strokes of color. It was trust, admiration, unspoken affection, and a depth of emotional intimacy that neither of them had anticipated. And as she settled into her usual chair, Ethan adjusted the canvas on the easel with careful precision, stepping back to examine it, his eyes narrowing in concentration, and Mara watched him with a fascination that went beyond maternal pride or familial love, noticing the care in every line, the thoughtfulness in every shading, the subtle way he captured light and shadow not just on the paper, but in the essence of her expression, and she felt a strange sense of awe, a realization that she was seeing herself not only as she appeared outwardly, but as someone deeply observed, appreciated, and understood, and in that understanding lay a quiet vulnerability that made her heart race with awareness and anticipation. They talked as he painted, their voices soft and easy, brushing over memories, dreams, and small confessions, and Mara was struck by the way their conversations had deepened over time, how even laughter held new weight, how gentle teasing carried a tenderness she had not known existed between them, and as she noticed the slight tremor in his hands, the hesitation when he tilted his head just so, she felt protective, proud, and quietly fascinated all at once, a mixture of emotions that left her breathless in its intensity, yet grounded by the safety and respect that framed their interactions, a careful dance of connection and distance, warmth and boundaries, and she realized that the studio, the painting, the shared time together, had become a sanctuary, a space where emotions could breathe, where trust could flourish, where hearts could speak in silence, and every brushstroke was a word in a conversation they had never spoken aloud. As the final hours of sunlight poured into the room, Ethan stepped back from the canvas, eyes wide with a mixture of relief, pride, and something unspoken, and Mara stood to look at it with him, her breath catching at the sight, at the reflection of herself captured with such tenderness, depth, and clarity, and she felt a lump rise in her throat, a wave of emotion that was both overwhelming and exhilarating, realizing that this painting had become a mirror to her own heart, reflecting courage, beauty, vulnerability, and strength she had never fully acknowledged. And Ethan, sensing the weight of the moment, shifted slightly, his gaze lingering on her in a way that was charged yet respectful, tender yet electric, and Mara's heart fluttered, a combination of admiration, affection, and a delicate stir of longing she couldn't name but felt entirely, fully. They spoke quietly, words flowing like a gentle river, discussing details of the painting, choices in shading, the lines of light across her face, but beneath the surface of conversation ran a current of emotion neither could fully express, a subtle tension of feelings that had grown naturally, innocently, beautifully over the weeks, a mixture of recognition, desire, curiosity, and the thrill of being understood, truly and deeply, by another human soul. And Mara felt that thrill with a soft ache of awareness, a bittersweet taste of how emotions could surprise and overwhelm without warning, without malice, simply because hearts were delicate and complex, and human connection was a force impossible to predict or contain. As Ethan cleaned his brushes, pausing occasionally to glance at Mara with a hesitant, questioning look, she felt herself drawn to him in ways that were entirely new, entirely stirring, entirely unexpected, and she realized the painting had changed more than just the canvas. It had transformed how they saw each other, how they acknowledged each other's presence, how every look, every gesture, every shared silence carried weight, meaning, and the potential for something profoundly emotional, quietly intimate, and deeply human. And she noticed the subtle warmth in his gaze, the small tension in his shoulders, the nervous yet deliberate care in his movements, and Mara felt a mixture of protectiveness, admiration, and a soft flutter in her chest, a recognition of the extraordinary bond that had grown in the simplest yet most profound of ways, through art, trust, and shared time. As the day faded into a golden dusk, Mara stepped closer to the canvas, running her fingers lightly over the texture of the paper, and Ethan watched her, his expression unreadable yet open, vulnerable yet composed, and Mara's heart swelled with awareness, understanding, and a gentle ache, realizing that their afternoons together had created not just a painting, but a quiet revolution of emotion, a tender upheaval of the heart, A delicate awakening of feelings that neither could deny yet neither could fully name, and in that awareness the room seemed to vibrate with possibility, with questions, with the beauty of shared human experience. Ethan hesitated, then spoke softly. "I hope this doesn't change anything between us." And Mara, feeling a lump rise in her throat, shook her head gently, smiling through the emotional tide. "It doesn't have to. It's just us and the art and this moment." And the words were heavy with unspoken meaning, a promise of respect, an acknowledgement of connection, and a quiet thrill of emotional intimacy that neither had expected. And as they stood together in the fading light, the room filled with the soft shadows of evening, Mara realized that life could surprise her in ways she hadn't imagined, that hearts could connect deeply even in quiet, careful ways, and that the simple act of posing, of being seen, had opened a door to understanding, tenderness, and a bond that felt impossible to break. They lingered in the studio long after the painting was complete, speaking softly, sharing stories, laughing quietly, the atmosphere filled with warmth, respect, and subtle emotion, a mixture of pride, admiration, and an ineffable tension that was beautiful, innocent, and profoundly moving. And Mara felt her heart swell with gratitude, joy, and a quiet longing that was safe yet powerful, a testament to the human capacity for connection, for noticing, for truly seeing another person and being seen in return. And she knew, as the last light faded from the windows, that this day, this painting, this shared space would remain in her heart forever, a memory of growth, trust, and the delicate dance of emotion that had transformed ordinary afternoons into something extraordinary, something lasting, something quietly, profoundly human. As she prepared to leave the studio, Mara turned back for a final glance at the painting, at Ethan, at the quiet, sacred space they had shared, and her heart thumped with anticipation and wonder, knowing that their story was far from over, that the bond they had forged would continue to shape them, inspire them, and touch them in ways neither could fully predict. And with that awareness, she stepped out into the cool evening air, carrying with her the warmth of connection, the thrill of emotional intimacy, and the quiet, persistent knowledge that life, love, and human understanding often arrived in the most unexpected yet beautifully profound ways, leaving her both breathless and comforted, eager for the next chapter, the next shared glance, the next quiet heartbeat in the soft, golden light of their continuing journey. And as she walked down the familiar hallway, Mara smiled softly, her heart full, her mind alive with possibility, and her spirit quietly transformed, because some connections, some moments, some afternoons spent simply together could change everything without a word, a gesture, or even a single brushstroke. Yet in their silence, in their subtlety, they spoke volumes, whispered truths, and left indelible marks on the heart that would last forever. And she knew without doubt that this was one of those rare, unforgettable bonds, a journey of emotion, artistry, and quiet romance that would shape the rest of her life, lingering like the soft glow of sunset long after the day had ended, a testament to the beauty of human connection, trust, and the power of being truly seen.